work here first. Over the past week or so, I've been reading Over the Wire, and it's a terrific read. Mind you, I'm quite biased because this is an area in which I look for good material. It is really a vivid portrayal of life inside a Second World War prisoner of war camp. It's a compelling testament of youth expected to carry the burden of a cause on which the future of the world and its peace and liberty depended. It's an extraordinary tale of a Canadian airman who did his duty not once, but twice. And if you consider his escape activity and what he's just done with his book, perhaps 3 times duty. First as a volunteer in the Air Force, then as a POW required by King and Country to attempt to escape. And maybe there's a third duty required and met here, that of writing, publishing, and telling his story in published form, so that those who come after us can understand the nature of that original duty, serving his country, the near futility of the second duty, trying to escape, and the demanding nature of the third, writing a book. Whoops, there goes my notes. I'll get it. Thanks, Andy. Andrew Carswell has had a full life. After serving in the Air Force and the RCAF and RAF during the war, he studied architecture at the University of Toronto. He worked as a laborer building houses in Toronto. He married Dorothy, who is here today, and together they raised 5 children. How many grandkids? 10 grandkids. And how many great-grandkids? 2. They're still working on it. And he returned to flying after the war. He was an instructor in Ottawa and Vancouver and in the far north, flying just about anything with wings. He received the Air Force Cross from the Queen, that medal. And he then flew in Europe and the Middle East, ultimately retiring from the Air Force in 1970. He found a new career with the Department of Transportation as an aviation inspector. He worked another 18 years before he retired yet again in 1988. But never, ever really ready to completely retire, he's now become an author. Welcome, author Andrew Carswell.
Okay. How does that title feel, author?
It feels rather odd because I don't write fiction. That book is not fiction, it's absolute facts. And one reason that I wrote it was because there are an awful lot of war stories published that have certain exaggerations in them. Have you ever heard the term line shoot? Shooting a line? And this is very common in the Air Force as well as other places. And this type of story, you know, there I was upside down and nothing on the clock and 99 fighters chasing me and this kind of thing were very common. But I thought it would be nice to write a story that was absolutely factual, and where the Germans, which were the bad guys, turned out to be not so bad after all. I had to write about them also. You know, the Germans, as you know, are basically the same as we are. Most of them. Adolf Hitler wasn't, and his gang wasn't, and they're a bunch of ruffians. But anyway, I won't bore you with that. But my main claim to fame is that it is an actual case of a factual story of what happened, and there are many of you veterans here that probably did more exciting things and went through more traumatic things, but didn't write about it or even tell anybody about it. So pardon me if I wrote all this stuff out and got it published.
Why would we have to pardon you? I think we're going to commend you for doing it.
Well,
but we'll get around to that in a minute.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's talk for a few minutes because I don't think I need it. I'm always fascinated because one of my focuses in some of my work is on military aviation. I've always been fascinated why people fall in love with flying, and I know that in one of your early references in the book, you referred to Captains of the Clouds, which was the movie that Warner Brothers did about the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. But what was it that captured your imagination about flying first?
That's a good question. I don't know, really.
That's why I asked
Except that when you look up in the air and you see a bird flying by, and when you're young, you think that would be nice to be able to be up there and look around and see things. You know, the most wonderful sensation is being able to fly.
Do you remember the first aircraft you saw?
First aircraft I saw was that I flew in. Actually, it was up at Sparrow Lake at a summer resort that one of my uncles owned, and a fellow came by the local dock and wanted to sell me a ride for $3. So I paid him $3. I didn't know that he was a student, that he was just getting money to pay his way. So I got a ride on a seaplane. At that time, I thought that was really wonderful.
How old were you?
Well, I was, what, 15 or something like that.
What did it feel like?
Oh, it felt wonderful. Yeah, just great. So anyway, so the long and the short of it is, when I was 18, I was going to Malvern Collegiate in Toronto, the east end of Toronto, the Beaches area. And I went, and the principal said I was in grade 12. I had been put back a year because I was born in California, and by the time I got up to Toronto, I was supposed to go into grade 2, but I only did grade 1. Their schools weren't very good down there at that time. So anyway, to make a long story short, the principal, I was in grade 12, the principal said anybody who wants to get their junior matriculation early and has war work to do can get off early. So I said, would joining the Air Force be war work? And he said, oh yeah, that would be war work. So I went and joined the Air Force, and a couple of months later I was at Belleville getting selected, and then a month or two after that I was in Goderich in an elementary flying training school, flying a little biplane, and
How long did it take you to solo?
about 8 hours.
That's about it.
You know, and then I went to number 5 Service Flying School at Brantford, where I flew the Avroanson, and was very disappointed because I wanted to be a fighter pilot like all these movie characters, you know, shooting down Messerschmitts and getting medals and things, but it wasn't to happen. And I got my wings flying the Avroanson, a twin-engine airplane, and after that, I was posted overseas.
As a sergeant pilot, right?
I was made a sergeant pilot, yeah. I was a sergeant pilot, which was the lowest rank you could be to be a pilot. And I went overseas, and they immediately sent me on courses here and there and all over the place. And I learned to fly airspeed Oxford, and I was an instrument, you know, the grandfather of the ILS, the thing that the airliners use to fly in these days. And I went to Operational Training Unit on OTU, they called it, on Wellington bombers, a great big bomber that had a crew of 5. And then they sent me to a conversion unit where I converted onto Lancasters, flying the Manchester first, which is a twin-engine Lancaster, won't fly on one engine. And finally, they sent me to a squadron. And so I joined up in 1941, and by the end of 1941, I was
Ready for ops.
Well, I'm sorry. I went overseas in 1942, early in 1942, and by the end of 1942, I was on a squadron.
Let me just put all of this into some perspective, because you see a man sitting before you with his Air Force Cross and many stories to tell since the war, but at age 19, he's not even legally able to drink. He's the skipper of a 7-man crew of a 20-ton bomber. He's responsible for delivering bombs to a target in Europe and for getting the aircraft and his crew home safely. What did that responsibility at 19 feel like?
I really wasn't aware that it was a great responsibility. As a matter of fact, the adjutant on the squadron remarked that this young Canadian was very cocky, but we'll knock it out of him.
Little did he know.
Little did he know, but so I got onto the squadron in December, before Christmas, and in January, just after Christmas, I was shot down on my 4th trip. So I didn't really do much during the war. I was shot down.
You give us a fairly complete description of the being shot down in January on the 17th in 1943 during a bombing run to Berlin.
It takes many pages to explain in the book, because every detail is important. It takes many minutes to digest after you've read it. How long did it take in real time, being shot down?
Real time, being shot down took about, I guess, 5 minutes altogether. You know, between the time the aircraft caught on fire, the engines started burning in towards 1,000 gallons of gasoline, and we got the whole crew out. We start off at about 20,000 feet, and by the time we're down around 10,000 feet, everybody's out of the aircraft. And then that's when my story starts.
How many parachute jumps had you done prior to that?
None. In those days, the paratroopers took a lot of training, and they didn't jump at night, and they didn't jump in high winds or anything like that. And landing in a parachute is something like jumping off a 15-foot fence, you know, with no parachute.
There's a wonderfully poignant moment in that 5 minutes between you and a man named Galbraith.
Oh, yeah.
Just share a little bit of that for us, because it's such an important moment.
Well, Galbraith was our navigator. There was a story behind him that I didn't know at the time. He had secretly married a nurse, and he was only a sergeant. And in those days, other ranks weren't allowed to marry officers, and vice versa. And she was an officer. And so they kept their marriage secret. And we could never figure out why this chap never went out on pub crawls with us and hanging around and drinking beer and things like that. And he spent his time writing letters every night to his girlfriend, or to his wife, because he'd just been married the night before he went overseas. And that was Galbraith. And so when we were going down, everybody was out except Galbraith and me. And I said, okay, get out. The front hatch was lots of air blowing in there, and we were going straight down, and the fire was getting ready to blow the airplane up. And he said, no, we can make it home. And I said some bad things to him. I said, don't be stupid, you know. We're going down, and we got a couple of seconds left to go. And he said, no, put it on a course 270 and head for England. And I said, no way. If you're not going to go get out of the way, I'm going to go anyway. And so I went out ahead of him, and I felt very guilty about that, because in the movies, you know, the captain always waits in the last manner, punches him in the jaw and carries him out or something like that. So, you know, the movies are all full of baloney, as you know.
You gave him something.
So he did get out, because he was missing when we all got recaptured by the Germans, and they were after him even in the interrogation camp. They wanted to know where he was, but eventually he was found in the woods, and they never did give us the details of how he was killed. Now, of course, some got killed by the local population, and some, it was 20 below zero there in Germany. And 20 below zero is fairly cold, you know, when you aren't too well dressed. So,
Had you not given him something prior to this?
oh yeah, yeah.
Flight?
Oh, yeah. You've read that book better than I have. Anyway, I had a Rolex watch which my father had given me on my 18th birthday, and had my name, rank, and number engraved in the back, and the date of my first solo, which was in Uxbridge way back when. And I had lent it to him because so many people had been shot down in our squadron. The crew who had done the most trips had only done 12 trips, and he had to do 30 before he got arrested and got sent some other place, 30 trips. And this was a bad time in 1943. In fact, during the whole war, 4 out of 10 air crew that flew over Europe got killed in bomber command, not in coastal command. You could fly 1,000 hours before you found a submarine. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. I don't want to talk too much here.
That's okay. That's what you're here for. A little bit of water.
You can ask my wife. I talk too much.
But tell us what you gave him.
What I gave
John.
Galbraith, yeah.
Yes.
I lent him my wristwatch. I lent him my wristwatch because it was a good watch, and it was much better than the navigation watches that they were issued. And I had a cheaper watch on. So later on, when I was in the prison camp, a year later, about, commanding officer, the commandant, called me in, and I thought I was going to be shot or something for escaping, but it turned out, he said, "Do you recognize